Didn't see you there. I was just adding labels to my new Rainbow High dolls. This says potential skin sensitizer. I felt like it wasn't clear because it was just on the bottom of the box. And you know, I felt like my copy should be a little more obvious. You see, they put the only warning on the bottom of the box, which I feel like was a little deceptive because the bottom of the box is, well, you know, facing down on the shelf and more difficult to see. And also, if you look at online listings, you can't actually read the bottom of the box because they never take photos of it. Not really a fan of that. But you know, at least they put some disclaimers. Wait a second, why does a doll need a chemical warning disclaimer anyways? Let's just check what that says. Contains 2-hydroxyethyl acrylate, may produce allergic reaction. Warning, not suitable for children under 8 years. Why 8? Use under adult supervision. Well, I am an adult. Keep contents away from eyes. Avoid skin contact with liquid formulation before it solidifies. Wash hands thoroughly after use. Use in well-ventilated area. What does well-ventilated mean? I've always wondered that. Like, this room only has one window. So I'm not really sure what it means by well-ventilated. Do I need 2 windows? 1 window? Is there like a square footage? I don't know. But it also doesn't really explain what happens if you touch it. Why can't you touch it? Why can't you get it in your eyes? I mean, usually you shouldn't get things in your eyes. As a general rule, I would say don't get things in your eyes. Even if they're like non-toxic, don't get them in your eyes. But touching them, that seems a little more troublesome. The chemical that's supposedly in this doll, and possibly this doll, although we'll discuss that one later, is 2-hydroxyethyl acrylate. What does that mean? I don't know. Is it safe? I don't know. I guess I'll have to look into it. Now I know what you might be thinking. Chemicals are everywhere. Yes, I've heard dihydrogen monoxide is perfectly safe, but can also be deadly in large enough quantities. I've heard the joke. I'm just trying to scare you with a big long chemical name like 2-hydroxyethyl acrylate. I mean, it's not like a major retailer like MJ Entertainment would ever put something on store shelves that could potentially harm children, right? Resin has really blown up in the last few years, both in the crafting and beauty communities. Gel nail polish and sculpting gels now have at-home versions for people to do manicures, and they're also used for general crafting. But there are art supplies specifically for resin crafting. There's resin printers, which are far more accessible. There's 2-part resin epoxy that cures after it's mixed, which is like this. It comes in 2 bottles and you mix them. And there's also UV resin, which cures in sunlight, or usually a UV lamp is much faster, but resin is now a household item. Everyone is making resin coasters or cups or earrings with dried flowers in them. There are YouTube channels built on making mini or massive resin creations, and of course, in the aisle of every Target or whatever, there are miniverse. MGA and miniverse make it minis, and they're running with the law. In June of 2024, MGA recalled 21 million units of their miniverse Make It Mini sets due to the presence of liquid resin that was deemed unsafe in children's toys. The resin wasn't accidental, obviously. It was a selling feature because the way that these kits function is to create tiny, solid plastic foods with resin connecting together the components. For example, a tiny bowl of cereal could be filled with milk-like resin to make it appear full. The resin used was UV resin, which cures under UV light from the sun, or a specially purchased lamp, which MGA was also selling. The recall was due to violation of the Federal Hazardous Substances Act due to having substances that, quote, exceed the allowed amounts for toys. It is unclear what the appropriate amount of resin allowed in toys is, but it exceeded it. Let's go ahead and read the FHSA's definitions page for more information. By the way, I have this printed out here on my board, and I'll also put it on screen to be helpful, and obviously all of these sources will be in my description. The term hazardous substance means any substance or mixture of substances which is 1. Is toxic, 2. Is corrosive, 3. Is an irritant, 4. Is a strong sensitizer, 5. Is flammable or combustible, or 6. Generates pressure through decomposition, heat, or other means. Assuming such a substance or mixture of substances may cause substantial personal injury or illness during or as a proximate result of any customary or reasonably foreseeable handling or use, including reasonably foreseeable ingestion by children. So, hazardous substance is things that are hazardous. Wow, who could have guessed? It wasn't that specific in this section, but it has a later section that more thoroughly defines the term toxic. For example, the term toxic shall apply to any substance other than a radioactive substance, because that's categorized separately, which has the capacity to produce personal injury or illness to man through ingestion, inhalation, or absorption through any body surface. The term irritant means any substance not corrosive within the meaning of subparagraph I, which on immediate, prolonged, or repeated contact with normal living tissue will induce a local inflammatory reaction. The term strong sensitizer means a substance which will cause on normal living tissue through an allergic or photodynamic process a hypersensitivity which becomes evident on reapplication of the same substance. So an allergy. The original miniverse kits contained hydroxyethyl methacrylate, also known as Hylwa, as well as isobornyl acrylate, IBOA. I am not a chemist, so take my words with a grain of salt. I will be citing information throughout this video in detail that you can look more at later, but let's look at the most basic information that I could find related to Hylwa and IBOA. The website PubChem has pages for, I would assume, all chemicals, but Hylwa and IBOA are on there certainly, and it has things like a helpful table of contents which allow you to see the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals, aka the GHS hazard statements, which from what I can tell are made from collating hundreds of reports from companies who are producing different chemicals to see which hazard statements are common to all sources. For example, IBOA is listed as an irritant, an environmental hazard which can cause skin, eye, and respiratory reactions, skin allergies, and is also listed as an environmental hazard that is toxic to aquatic life. Hylwa is listed as an irritant which causes skin reactions, skin allergies, and eye irritation. I guess you can just dump that one into the water supply. So, Hylwa is a very common ingredient on the market in nail products, such as gel nail polish and sculpting gels. If you look into Hylwa in particular, you will find a lot of research into allergic reactions. Both nail technicians and nail clients are prone to developing this allergy, as well as allergies to related methacrylate products. 2 Hylwa is actually what's in here, this little bottle of UV resin that I got at Michael's. It says very clearly here, well, I guess it's not that clear for you, but I'm close to it, so I can see. It says, warning, the UV resin contains chemical 2-hydroxyethyl methacrylate, may produce allergic reaction by skin contact, harmful to eyes, and if swallowed or inhaled. Do not inhale fumes. Use in well-ventilated area, wear safety gloves, safety glasses, and protective mask. So a thorough description, and I'm sure that's exactly what the miniverse balls had on them, right? Hylwa is often used as a screening chemical in tests for methacrylate allergies, because many methacrylate allergies cross-react. So if you have an allergy to one, you might have an allergy to multiple others. In the chart I'm showing here, you can see that most people with nail polish-related allergic contact dermatitis, ACD, reacted to Hylwa, with a smattering across the board relating to other methacrylates. This chart is from a patch test study, which is generally what they do to test for allergies, and it essentially involves applying very, very small amounts to patients that have been determined in advance, to have ACD and checking them for a reaction. If you look up case studies where patients have active ACD, you will find some quite nasty images of people with peeling rashes all over their fingers and hands. which does not look fun. Iboa is a less common ingredient from what I can tell, but it is up and coming in the allergy game. It was even named the American Contact Dermatitis Society's Allergen of the Year in 2020, a very prestigious distinction, I'm sure. Iboa is specifically used as an adhesive in medical devices for diabetic patients, but can cause allergic reactions, although these do not appear to cross-react as much as with other methacrylates and acrylates from what I can tell, the way that like Hema does. So it's more a specific allergen for people using those adhesives in medical devices. Now, mind you, these mini kits were not 100% Hema or Iboa. I'm not saying that. They would have contained things like fillers and things like pigments and glitters as well. As far as I can tell, there is no reason to assume they function very differently than similar nail products or art products. I could find some safety data sheets for a few resins sold by like art brands, and they were more like 30 to 50% of the active ingredient, in this case a methacrylate of some kind. And then the rest would have been like the building blocks and the rest of the filler that is non-reactive with UV. But it's clear that the miniverse kits had at least enough methacrylates or acrylate in them to develop reactions among some users. Whether those users developed a sensitization because of repeated use or an allergy to methacrylates already existed is unknown and would also be really difficult to trace.
Allergies, Part 1. What is a methacrylate?
Allergic contact dermatitis is different from irritant contact dermatitis, and I'm going to explain the difference here because it's important. I'm not a chemist, so I'm not going to explain the fullest perfectest science, but I am trying to simplify everything, and I will put sources on screen where you can learn more. If you've bleached your hair or cleaned a bathroom, you probably know it's important to wear gloves when handling bleach. Bleach kills germs, which is why we use it for cleaning, but it doesn't really differentiate between skin and germ. So exposure to bleach can cause contact dermatitis because your skin is dying of contact. Now, methacrylates can also cause irritant dermatitis. They are called monomers before they are cured. A monomer, meaning one, is a tiny little building block, and you can think of it like it can get into your skin and theoretically damage your cells directly. So that could cause irritation. Once cured, they become polymers, poly meaning multiple, and then the building blocks are all stacked together like Legos and they're not going to break. So they're fine. They won't cause any reaction. Polymers are safe to touch and can't get in your skin. They're okay. You might know from science class that the immune system remembers invaders like viruses and germs. That's how vaccines work. Our body sees something unfamiliar in its cells and says, hey, I'm not a fan. If that guy comes around again, I'm gonna mess him up. And this is exactly how an allergy forms. Once that unfamiliar thing comes back, the immune system reacts more strongly and in advance of actual damage, or in place of actual damage, and thereby kind of messes you up because an allergic reaction will also be deeply uncomfortable. Your immune system, of course, sometimes remembers harmless unfamiliar things that enter the body, like pollen is a common one. For that reason, you can get an allergy to anything, in theory, but methacrylates seem to be very prone to causing allergies, from what I can tell at least. Studies of the general population suggest that somewhere between 1% and 3% of the population react to some form of methacrylate or acrylate. Remember though, most people, especially children, aren't exposed to methacrylates regularly, and methacrylates can cause sensitization, so a person might be fine touching them once, but develop an allergy if they touch it multiple times. That 1% is based on the population broadly, not taking into consideration exposure. That 1% of people aren't all becoming nail techs. It's that nail techs are exposed to this allergenic chemical more often, and so you see the allergy crop up among them a lot more. I'm going to talk more about methacrylate and acrylate allergies in a little bit, but we're going to put that down for now and move on.
So that's everything that happened in 2024.
To recap, Number 1. The Federal Hazardous Substances Act restricts the use of hazardous, aka toxic, corrosive, irritant, sensitizing substances, especially in children's toys. 2. Miniverse brand toys contain 2-hydroxyethyl methacrylate, also known as HEMA, as well as isoboronyl acrylate, also known as iboa, which are known irritants and can cause allergies, allergic reactions, and sensitization from use over time. According to MGA, they received 26 reports of consumers injured by the product. The Consumer Product Safety Commission has 7 publicly available case reports about Miniverse, suggesting the product causes rashes or does not work as intended. I have a couple of these up on the board. The MGA ones are not available for public viewing. It follows that Miniverse was recalled, and at least those exact formulations would not reach shelves again, although Miniverse is available now. So surely with this information, MGA would not release another toy targeting children that could cause anything similar, right? And they would surely label them very clearly with their potential to cause sensitization and the need for protective equipment when using them so that people don't develop allergies. Right?
Rainbow High Creative Crystals. MGA's doll line branches out.
I'm back. Sorry, I had to go to lunch and also charge my camera's battery. Please like the video and subscribe if you would like me to get a second camera battery so I don't have to charge in the middle of recording everything. Or I could just spend my money on, practical things, but instead I bought these. This here is Rainbow High Creative Crystals, a toy that combines a Rainbow High doll with a bottle of resin and molds that can create resin accessories. My favorite part of this toy is how incongruous those two things are. Like, really doesn't seem like you needed to put them together, but you did, so we're here. To clarify, I'm not a toy unboxing and review channel. I make custom and handmade dolls, sometimes out of clay, sometimes out of other dolls, but I generally buy things secondhand. This doll here is a Rainbow High doll. Her name is Gabriella, officially speaking. But she is from the thrift store. I did not buy her new. She was also much cheaper than these two since I bought them new. I figured though, for this video, that I would be doing an unboxing and making the resin pieces for at least one doll. So I bought Iris. I bought her before I bought this one, and I'll explain why in a second. But the primary reason that I bought her first was because I could see she was selling out, and she was my favorite one. I figured if I'm going to do this video, I should get a doll that I like, because I like dolls. I felt like I should give, these products a fair chance, so I also bought some Miniverse balls. Hopefully these have resin in them. I bought 2 of them because they're blind boxes, and I couldn't tell which one was which. But they do have different, number codes, so I think that they're different. I, looked at the numbers on the bottom, but I didn't look at which number corresponds to what. I purchased this doll after the fact because you'll notice that this doll here I put on the front of the box contains 2-hydroxyethyl acrylate, probably. And that's because I started doing research for this video after seeing one of these dolls in store and taking a picture of the bottom of the box. And on the bottom of the box I read contains 2-hydroxyethyl acrylate. I started doing research and then I fell down a rabbit hole. This doll here has that same warning. She says contains 2-hydroxyethyl acrylate. Now, if you look closely, you can see that this one looks slightly different from this one. I took video in store of 2 of these blue dolls right next to each other. They were basically identical except for that little thing on the bottom and the warnings on the bottom of the box. So I know that at least this one says that it contains this acrylate. This one I don't know what it contains. It doesn't seem to say it on the outside of the box from what I can tell, and I couldn't find any information about them changing the formula. So I don't actually know what chemical it contains. We're just going to go with assuming that it contains the same thing as this one, but if they did a first run with 2-hydroxyethyl acrylate and then they decided to change it after the fact, I don't know. Like, I'm just saying I don't know for certain what is in it. I'm going to do essentially an informal comparison between these two. I don't have the experience with like tons of different resins to say that much about it, but what I'm going to do is compare like sort of the subjective, like how it flows and like how the liquid like looks and everything. And then I'm also going to time how long it takes for everything to solidify under the sun and under a UV lamp so you can get a little more information. And I also want to compare that with the Make It Mini toys to see whether or not these resins seem similar or different to how the Rainbow High ones work. To clarify, 2-hydroxyethyl acrylate is not the same thing as what was in the old Miniverse brands boxes. This is 2-hydroxyethyl acrylate. Those were 2-hydroxyethyl methacrylate. These are different things. Methacrylate and acrylate are different. Methacrylate has like a methyl group on it. That's a chemical term for like a group of, I think it's a carbon with some hydrogens. Don't quote me on that. Most of the research I could find is primarily on 2-hema, not 2-hea, which is the acrylate as opposed to the methacrylate. Okay, we're going to start with the Rainbow High Creative Crystals kits, and I am going to do these with a top-down view of the camera, but you know, I'm going to do a full review, include everything, you know. So we'll start by just opening these boxes on camera. Now I have watched several other reviews, which have indicated that these boxes are terrible to open, so I'm not expecting this to be very fun. Let's open the one that I like the least first. And that's Skylar, by the way. I don't really like how this doll looks very much, but that's okay. I'll probably repaint both of them anyways. As you can see, I've now assembled Skylar and gotten all of her bits out of this awful, awful packaging. People were correct. It was truly heinous to try and unbox this. It's very funny to me how, like, they couldn't remove, like, the most functional aspects of this without, like, making it so if you don't make the pieces, then you, like, have really bad accessories. So, like, the front of the bear is, like, pre-made, and then you add the back of the bear. But, like, if I was a little kid, or honestly, even just, like, me right now, I'm like, well, I don't want to make the back of the bear. That's the boring part? Like, that's the part where toy companies, like, already give you toys that don't have, like, a back piece, and they're just, like, you know, the back piece is, like, an empty shell or something like that. So, like, making the kid make the bear, like, the back of the bear is, like, not that exciting. It's just kind of odd. And then, like, the ears are the same thing where, like, she already has ears, but then you have to make, like, more ear for her. Plus, like, if this was the front of the bear, then I can make as many bears as I want. But it's not. It's only the back of the bear. Because, like, I would be happy to have a silicone mold of the back of the bear. In fact, that's one of the only reasons I'm glad I got this little Skylar, is she comes with a little heart. It does say RH in it, which, like, I don't need it to say RH, but, you know, it's kind of fun that I now have a little heart mold, and, like, I don't know, tiny little teddy bear earring mold. Like, that's kind of fun. And, you know, if you're gonna, like, sell this as, like, a kit for creativity, I would want it to be reusable and, like, not just, like, for this one single project, because that's just, like I said, like, a little wasteful, but I mean, that's kind of their whole business model. Oh, look, there's more little plastic tags. I don't even have recycling in my building, so if I want to recycle any of this, I have to bring it to my dad's house. He lives like an hour away. Hello, it is the next day, and I have a couple of notes. As you can see, I freed Iris from her prison.
And I have assembled a bunch of stuff on top of her, and I've also gotten all of her little pieces out. I have a few notes before I get started, so I waited until the next morning to start doing this because I thought that, well, frankly, yesterday was very hot, and I did not want to deal with that, because I would need to have the window open for proper ventilation. So I waited until this morning because I figured it would be cooler. But unfortunately it is overcast now. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to do the same kind of experiment that I wanted to do and test how fast they cure compared to each other, because I wanted to see whether or not these are the same formulation. Everything in the box that other than the outside of the box was the same for both of these pretty much, other than the appearance of the decoration, so it doesn't seem like very much has changed. The warning labels are the same, everything. I wanted to protect the table, so I put down this plastic wrap on the table. Obviously I'm going to move the dolls out of the way. I also am going to be wearing gloves so I don't get it on my skin. I also am going to be wearing a mask. Now you might be like, what kind of mask? Because they don't actually recommend a mask. They recommend eyewear, but not a mask for some reason. They just say work in a well-ventilated area. Well, resin, including resin that is low odor or no odor, is going to produce invisible fumes that are not good to breathe in. So you might think a mask like these ones that are common nowadays, or these ones, would work because they work for viruses, but that is not the case. The thing that works is a 3M type respirator mask. These are for painters. It's not actually that expensive. I think these are $30 or $40. But yeah, it looks like overkill, but this is the appropriate thing to wear when working with resins. Do they make this in child size? No. Not as far as I know, at least. Now, I'm not going to really be able to talk while wearing this, so once I put this on, we're going to switch over to voiceover, and I'll just talk about how the process was and everything, and you'll get to see it on this ugly background.
Hello viewers, this is voiceover Regina to give you my thoughts after completing these projects. First off, this rainbow highline is called Creative Crystals. I would argue that this project is neither creative nor particularly crystal-like. It is about as creative as assembling IKEA furniture, except much worse, because I actually like assembling IKEA furniture. It is as believable as crystal as those scam AI mugs that people keep getting from Etsy. It is barely a craft. You get one color, one bottle, one try with very direct instructions. I didn't expect much from clear resin in terms of being crystalline, and yet I was still kind of disappointed. They really couldn't have spared half-quarter teaspoon of mica or something, maybe some glitter. To be honest, I thought this part of the video would take me 2 hours tops, and only that much because I'd be filming and timing it. And I was kind of excited because, like I've said, I like resin and I like dolls. I have used UV resin. I have used epoxy resin. But somehow this took most of the day between the actual time to make all the pieces and curing them in stages and fixing all the annoying little issues. On the positive side, I will say the instructions are fairly accurate in that this resin does cure in 5 to 10 minutes in the sun. Even though it was overcast and cloudy that day, it worked. Unfortunately, it is usually near the upper end, more like 10 minutes. I had the impression that using a UV lamp would speed that up, as the curing time for normal UV resin I use is on the lower end when using the lamp, and takes a little bit longer when curing in the sun. Nope, it took the same amount of time under the lamp, so I ended up using the sun. I hate having to turn the UV lamp on again and again, especially because the light always hurts my eyes. I know, don't look at the UV light, but it does. Of course, my lamp might just not be the right kind of lamp, but it is a generic lamp that a lot of people probably have and would try to use if they know anything about resin and they have this kit.
I can only assume that the person who developed the idea for these kits is a sadist who hates children and also their parents. I like and have done many craft projects with young relatives. I've done them while volunteering and working with kids. The idea of doing a craft project with a material that a child should absolutely not touch and filling these molds using a comb as a tool is an absolute nightmare. The adult would have to do basically all the work, and I can't imagine that being very fun for the kid. The red resin was more difficult to work with than the blue resin, forming way more bubbles from what I could tell. They took the same time to cure and were a relatively similar consistency, which is to say much thicker than normal UV resin. And it was very warm in my room, so I didn't warm up the bottles or anything like some people recommend, because usually getting them warmer will make them a little bit more flowy and liquid. But yeah, they were still very gloopy. The bubbles in the red resin might have been worsened by the molds, and the star mold has a shape that I would not wish on my worst enemy. Were they a beginner resin artist at least? You see, this mold has a star shape, which means they come to a very sharp point. If you fill up the resin slightly too quickly or get bubbles while pouring, you end up with bubbles at the tip of the stars. I swear I spent like 30 minutes per layer trying to get the stupid bubbles out of these stupid stars. It was not fun. And you have to cure the big pieces, the purse and the headband, and the ears and the stars in multiple layers because UV doesn't penetrate solidified resin very well. I wanted to be extra safe, so instead of the recommended 2 or 3 layers, I did 3 or 4 layers respectively. Despite this, I had issues curing the rainbow piece, the big purse one, and for all I know, it still isn't cured properly. Remember, every layer takes 10 minutes, so that's 10 minutes between trying to pop all the bubbles for the big pieces, and also an adult having to figure out how to entertain their kid for 10-minute intervals, lest they get bored or get resin everywhere. The faux crystalness of it all would have been slightly less obnoxious if not for the bubbles, both tiny and big, which are blemishes upon my extremely hard work. The resin pieces are supposed to snap into the corresponding plastic pieces by having a little rim that is inset inside the plastic piece. This is a clever idea in theory, but whoever came up with it did not consider that having an overhang around the edges of the pieces would trap bubbles very easily, which seems to be most of the source of the bubble issue. Essentially, when you have anything at like a 90-degree or less turn, the bubbles can't rise up, so all of those overhangs are just ripe for getting lots and lots of bubbles. I really kind of wish they had thought that through. You're supposed to tilt the mold back and forth in order to have the resin flow into those little nooks and crannies better. But the problem with that is that the resin doesn't flow very fast, and it's just not easy to do that. Lastly, in order to fit these better into the corresponding plastic pieces, they included sandpaper, which is meant for sanding them. This is, to be frank, incredibly insane to me. It's like asking for mesothelioma light. The thing I have learned is that you shouldn't even be sanding non-toxic materials like wood or air-dry paper clay without protection. Your lungs really don't care if something is non-toxic. They really don't like dust particles being in them. Not to mention you could get it in your eyes or mouth. We eat enough microplastics as is. You don't need to add more to your diet by sanding resin toys. Like, I genuinely question the brain power of the person who decided to include sandpaper in a children's kit for sanding what is like a polymer material like this. Like, it's wild. It's just, in my opinion, that is like possibly as bad as the resin that I talk about in the rest of the video. I'm just like, that's wild. After spending all day on the rainbow high kits, I did the miniverse kits. There are just 2 of them, and they were much simpler to do. They were, generally speaking, not as annoying to do. One, because the result wasn't as cheap and bad looking, and also 2, just because they were much smaller and faster to do. The one with the cat ears was very simple and easy to the point of being sort of boring. It was literally just putting ice cubes in a container and then filling that with resin, and you can't even see the ice cubes from the outside of the container. But I mean, at least the container's a nice shape. That's the nicest thing I can say. The other one was a bear bottle that had like boba tea in it, and I was able to get a little more intentional, like move around the boba with my like tweezers and stuff. However, I will note that these were a little bit messy. Again, the resin was quite gloopy, and for the bear bottle in particular, the opening of the bottle was like the same size as the resin container. So that I ended up like kind of spilling it while I was trying to get it in onto my gloves, and then I changed my gloves. Between this and the dolls, I went through 3 pairs of gloves, which is quite a lot for one day, but resin can get through nitrile gloves if it's on there long enough, and then get on your skin through that. If you did not know, UV resin cures faster if there's more of it together, because the curing process basically emits heat, which is a chemical reaction that speeds up the process further. If it's on a thin layer on nitrile gloves, it like doesn't really cure, so you just have to remove the gloves as soon as you get resin on them. You can't even like cure them, which you typically do with like tools that get resin on them, for example. I would say the miniverse kit resin was pretty different from the doll resin. It felt even thicker and gloopier, but at least I didn't have to get it into like nooks and crannies as much. I mean, I just was surprised on how messy these all ended up being. Like, I was pouring epoxy resin from a large bottle on a scale last week, and I didn't spill any of it. But like these tiny bottles, with how thick the materials are, it's just not super conducive to not getting on you, because like it'll kind of end up being stringy and stick to the edges of the bottles really well. It's also very annoying not to know where to put my tools, like the tiny tweezers or the rainbow high comb, especially since things don't cure very fast, so I can't just cure them when I put them down, which is more what I'd do if I like had UV and I was using like a toothpick or something. I would just cure it once I set it down. I had to set them near the lamp and then wait till I was done to try and cure them, which took like 10 minutes, so it's kind of a nuisance. I ended up just setting everything in the sun. The instructions said to put all the resin in at once, so I did, but I am a little concerned they didn't cure all the way. They're mostly cure resin with like clearish emids, but the doll kit said to cure in layers because it was thicker, which seems like usually it's the case. Lastly, for my review section, I have to mention, after everything seemed cured and I set it out in the sun for extra time and everything, I cleaned up all my gloves and the plastic on the table and set it out on the porch to cure any remaining resin. I was a little snarky about good ventilation earlier, but I have a window and I put a fan blowing from the open door to the window in case there was any fumes, kept the cats out, kept myself out until it felt like it was aired out. And yet, after the airing out, I realized there was like a weird resiny smell lingering in the room. I couldn't track it down at the time. I didn't know if it was just like a piece of the resin that wasn't cured properly. Obviously I wore a respirator, so I don't know what resin it could be because I couldn't smell when I was doing it, so I don't know about that. Like I said, I do epoxy and UV resin in this room, and I let it air out after doing those, and ever since I got a respirator, I don't smell anything while doing crafts. I don't even smell residual stuff. I don't have that good a sense of smell, but it just makes it even weirder that there was like a mystery smell after playing with these, because normally I wouldn't have even noticed. I left these on the window for a few days, and when I took them off, I had a thought while looking at the honey bear. I'd wanted to poke through the resin to check, but the lids of the containers for the miniverse things wouldn't come off. However, I could stick a wire into the straws, and for the honey bear, it came out with liquid resin still on it. Presumably because the straw is too opaque for it to cure properly, and it's like in the middle of all of the stuff. I guess I'll have to try and angle a UV lamp into the straw very precisely in order to get it to cure, because it's sure as hell not cured right now. I thought this was going to be like the fun, silly part of the video where I just talk about doing silly craft projects, but no. It had to be not that fun, and also kind of hazardous. If only someone would have made a video about resin in children's toys to warn me away from these wicked demons. Anyways, after doing all that, I decided to do more resin crafts. I decided to use the Rainbow High molds to make extra earrings for Skylar, since her first set turned out so bad. And I wanted to have a better comparison for the Rainbow High resin to normal resin. So I donned my respirator and used my own UV resin with the Rainbow High molds to make new earrings and a new little ring heart thing. I can confirm in comparison the proper arts and crafts resin flows much better, it's thinner, it's easier to use. I didn't put down a plastic mat or anything, but I didn't get anything on my gloves or the table. I taped down the mold because it was warped, and that was the issue with the first set of earrings. After 1 minute under the UV lamp, the surface was completely hard, and when I put pressure on it, there was no shifting underneath, indicating there wasn't like a liquid layer. However, after 1 minute, it's not actually considered fully cured per the manufacturer. They say 2 to 4 minutes, so I did another minute on top, and then also flipped it over to do the bottom. I kind of think that having a long cure time could contribute to consumers having difficulty with the Creative Crystals kits. Like 5 to 10 minutes is literally like 10 minutes is twice the amount as 5 minutes. The instructions say to tap the resin to see if it's cured, but that can mess it up. Like for me, when I tapped on my first kit to test after like 5 minutes, the bottom wasn't, it was completely liquid underneath, and I basically made like a little iceberg, which contributed to the glasses having bubbles. And then the viscousness of the mixture meant it was sort of stringy, and the comb wouldn't cure, so it was very difficult to do that testing without being kind of messy. Second, you'll note that the resin I have hardens quite fast, but the manufacturer recommends extra time. But the Creative Crystals are not really like that, because in my experience, it took the full 10 minutes to get fully hard. But I don't know if that's equivalent to a full cure. Just because most of it is solid doesn't mean there couldn't be like molecules that aren't fully set inside of it. But it would also be harder to cure this for any extra time, because it already takes 10 minutes to do like one layer of a multi-layer piece. So, I don't know, it's just really inconvenient. These toys really don't even give consumers a good idea of how resin works, much less the associated hazards. If someone already knew about resin, like me, they'd just be baffled by the difficulty curing and dealing with it. But I can imagine other people becoming quite frustrated with the messiness of the activity, which is also reflected in a lot of reviews that I've seen. Anyways, after doing my experiment with the good resin, I popped out the earrings, and they were absolutely perfect, fit right into Skylar's earrings too. I'm considering doing a restyle where I use some of these molds with other resin and colorants, but I probably won't put it here on YouTube. I'll just put it on the socials or whatever. Anyways, end of my experience with the Rainbow High kits. Resin allergies, part 2. Acrylates here, there, everywhere.
So you might say, why should I care about a resin allergy? If I get an allergy to the silly little Rainbow High doll kit, I just stop doing it and I move on with my life. Same for the miniverse kits, and so on. Well, you'd be forgiven for thinking that it's as simple as that. Well, an allergy to one methacrylate can trigger sensitization to other methacrylates. According to a researcher I reached out to who studies methacrylates, acrylates are considered a stronger sensitizer and can sensitize to methacrylates and acrylates, whereas methacrylates only sensitize someone to other methacrylates. That's just one person's opinion, and they requested not to be named, so take that with a grain of salt. However, it is certain that methacrylate allergies tend to overlap. There's a lot of data that shows as such. Unfortunately, methacrylates are really useful, so they're used in a bunch of things that are not art projects. Remember how IBOA or IBOA was 2020's Allergen of the Year? Well, acrylates as a whole were named 2012's Allergen of the Year. And that category is much, much broader. Various methacrylates and acrylates are in things like medical adhesives and bone cement. Methacrylate allergy is very common in dental technicians because it is used in dental fillers and prostheses. There are also components of acrylates in things like hearing aids and contact lenses, which can affect people who have allergic reactions. If you're planning on never breaking a bone or having any other medical issues, you still can't count on avoiding methacrylates. They're in other materials like paints and printing ink, sanitary pads and diapers, and eyelash and hair extension glue, and of course nail polish related things. You might think, well, if someone has an allergy to methacrylates or acrylates already, it shouldn't change anything if they touch resin, right? Well, the point is that methacrylates are sensitizers, and repeated exposure could cause someone to develop a reaction or a more severe reaction in the future. Think of it like we want the amount of times that people touch methacrylates to be for instances where they really need them, like dental fillers, rather than toys. Well, at least I would prefer that. Most of the methacrylate research I was able to find was on adults, because they're in industries where they would be exposed to methacrylates or acrylates. I saw one mention of a child who had used her mother's nail products and had an allergic contact dermatitis reaction, but that's it. Per the research I found, it is actually not clear whether children have higher rates of allergic contact dermatitis in general than adults, but it did say that the rates are higher than literature predicted. That same study also mentioned it might not be necessary to test children on chemicals like epoxy, and that makes me wonder if any of the earlier studies on children and allergies included methacrylates or acrylates. A different article from 2021 discusses upcoming allergies, including boba, which is again seen in diabetes patients. I couldn't find information specifically about children and toy kits like these, even though there obviously are cases that have been submitted to MGA and the Consumer Safety Commission about children getting rashes from chemicals like these. I actually contacted one of the researchers on one of those studies testing children on different allergies, but I didn't hear anything back, so the jury is out.
Resin and safety, if you want to be.
Saying all of this, you might be like, oh my god, I'm so scared of resin and methacrylates. It's not how I wanted this video to go. I like resin. It's very stable after it's polymerized, aka after it goes through the chemical reaction that hardens it completely. That is why I've been interested in learning how to use it properly and doing a bunch of research, which led me to being very frustrated about these toys. There are a lot of videos on resin safety, but I figured I should include some general tips for people in this video. The fumes that resin lets off are called volatile organic compounds, and you need a mask that filters those and nitrile gloves at a minimum. You're actually supposed to change your nitrile gloves regularly because methacrylates can sort of seep through the gloves over time. I read one study that said every 20 minutes for like dental technicians and such. If you're using large quantities of resin, consider using safety glasses in case it splashes. I've heard people with resin printers saying that it can like splash into your eyes, and for some people they do get like eye irritation, I think, from the fumes. My point is not to say that these things are totally blanket level dangerous and unfit for public use, even if they are somewhat toxic. I mean, maybe not fit for children to use, but there's a larger conversation to be had about resin in general. When we are doing anything in life, we have a cost-benefit analysis that we quietly run. If you go roller skating, you know you might sprain an ankle or skin a knee. The benefit of the exercise and fun is worth a little risk. If you practice an instrument, you might be at risk of a repetitive motion injury, but you still find joy in it, and you do things to avoid that if possible. Doing exercises, wearing knee pads in the case of roller skating, so on. Hell, you can even be a little unsafe if you want. Some people are lactose intolerant and feel like pizza is worth it. That's none of my business. The point of this, the whole video, everything I'm saying though, is that you decide. That you do the cost-benefit analysis, not a large company. which you can't do if the company providing you a product is not disclosing what's in the product and how it can affect you in the long or short term.
An aside for the nail girlies.
While researching this video, I found quite a few people saying that Hylwa was only found in really cheap gel nail polish brands, and that the pricier you go, the safer that you'll be, essentially. But that's not true as far as I can tell. It's a very standard chemical in many products, presumably including expensive brands. Just because something is expensive doesn't mean that it's always safe. I've also seen people saying that using a different methacrylate monomer will not trigger your allergies, but that's not always true. As I said, some methacrylates can be triggered by other methacrylates or diacrylates or whatever. That doesn't mean it's untrue. It is the case that if you have an allergy to one chemical, you're not necessarily allergic to another similar chemical or whatnot. It's not always going to be the case that just because it's a different chemical, you're not allergic to it. If you are experiencing an allergy, I mean, I'm not a doctor, but you can go to a doctor and request patch tests if you are able to, and then learn exactly what you are allergic to so you can avoid it. The reason for cross reactions are a little over my head, but it's very easy to find studies like the ones I showed in this video that show what the most common chemicals that people are allergic to are. And it is a known issue in the nail community that co-occurring allergies exist, and that many people who use gel nail polish will eventually get these allergies if they use it improperly and get it on their skin. If you want more information on gel nails and gel nail safety, I really recommend Lab Muffin Beauty Science's video, Are Gel Manicures Bad For You? And Jane Welch's video, Are Your Gel Manicures Causing Cancer? They're not primarily actually about the methacrylates in gel nail polish, but they do include some information on them. They're mostly about UV light, which is much less of a concern in my opinion than the methacrylate allergy risk. Anyways, that's the end of the aside for the nail girlies. I really need to get some nail polish thinner for this Holo Taco. It's like 4 years old. But it's still really glittery, so you know, thanks Christine.
Is MGA making resin safer? Or at least safer resin?
Is MGA making resin safer? The U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission has a website called saferproducts.gov where you can search publicly available consumer incident reports. The system doesn't have that many reports, at least not publicly available, so it doesn't represent the full scope of complaints against MGA's Miniverse or Rainbow High. Remember, MGA stated they had 27 complaints regarding Miniverse. Safer Products has 12 reports regarding Miniverse and 1 regarding Rainbow High's Creative Crystals, out of 46 total reports regarding MGA. And the record seems to go back until about 2005. Since 2023, nearly all of their newer complaints are regarding the resin-related toys. A fun fact is that MGA gets to comment on those incident reports, so I'm going to show you one. The report reads as follows. This product creates a very intense smell and causes nose and throat irritation. This product contains liquid resin and is not safe for anyone any age without PPE. Me and my daughter have sore throats and she got some on her hands, causing skin irritation. MGA's comment was as follows. The Miniverse DIY products have been tested and certified by approved third-party testing laboratory, and resin formulation reviewed by board-certified toxicologist as safe for use as intended. Product is age-graded for 8 years and up. One of the other incident reports, which is very long, so I'm not going to read it, but I will put it up on screen, also has a very interesting response from MGA.
MGA stated as follows. Resin is not expected to cause acute or chronic skin and eye irritation, acute or chronic oral, dermal, or inhalation toxicity, or be a strong sensitizer as defined in Title 16 of the United States Code of Federal Regulations, CFR.
Part 1500, subsection 3, paragraph C, subparagraph 4. Part 1500, subsection 3, paragraph C, subparagraph 2. Part 1500, subsection 3, paragraph C, subsection 3. And Part 1500, subsection 3, paragraph C, and subparagraph 5.
When used as intended based on the formulation assessment by a certified toxicologist.
So MGA responded to the parents whose children were injured by simply stating that they were incorrect. The skin irritation that these children experienced, or the respiratory issues that these children were experiencing, were just not real. They were made up. The one report on safetyproducts.gov regarding the Rainbow High doll is not someone who was injured, just a concerned bystander who works with resin. They said, noticed a new line of children's toys being released for young kids that has UV resin, which is toxic and can cause burns. It's the Rainbow High Creative Crystals toy line. The product listing shows the uncured UV resin being handled without gloves. I work with resins as part of my job, and I require gloves and a respirator or fume hood for safety. This company, MGA, already has a line of similar products recalled earlier this year due to children being injured. This new toy releases at the end of this month / in January, and I'm hoping this report gets to you before any injuries occur. Oddly enough, MGA's comment is literally the exact same as before. MGA says, resin is not expected to cause acute or chronic skin and eye irritation, acute or chronic oral, dermal, or inhalation toxicity, or be a strong sensitizer as defined in Title 16 of the United States Code of Federal Regulations, CFR, when used as intended based on the formulation assessment by a certified toxicologist. Actually, the funniest thing to me about this comment is that it uses the same format as before, where they start with C paragraph 4 and then do 2, 3, and 5. 5, 4, 2, 3, 5. I don't know if there's like a reason for that. Maybe there is like something in legalese that makes you do it out of order, but it really bothers me that the numbers aren't in order. It's just like this whole thing is imagining an artist trying to figure out how to read legalese. I can do scientific papers, but don't try to make me read the US Code of Federal Regulations. In fact, for a minute I thought maybe my citations earlier, my references to the FHSA, were incorrect and what I read out and put on this little board. But no, it's just that I didn't understand exactly the difference between the CFR and the US Code. What I read earlier was the definitions included in the US Code, which is the law, but the Code of Federal Regulations that MGA cites is technically more applicable because the way that the government works is complicated, and the US Code is the one that tells you it's illegal to kill people with toxic chemicals, and the CFR implements more specific rules as to how the code will be implemented. That's all I got. Either way, the CFR references the US Code, and it's just telling companies how to abide by the law as written in the FHSA, which I read out earlier. The CFR section basically says the same thing as the code, but longer. Part 1500, paragraph C, subsection 2, is to give specificity to the definition of toxic in section 2G of the Act, and that's just the Act, as in the FHSA, so that's what I read earlier in regards to the definition of toxic. And then it just says, comma, the following supplements that definition. So it just has a more detailed description of how you define toxicity. As I mentioned earlier, the FHSA is a little bit like broad and subjective, whereas this has more specific things. And then it follows up with more details on acute toxicity. Subsection 3 is about corrosive materials, 4 is irritants, and 5 is strong sensitizers. Again, all of these references are to the FHSA that I read earlier. All this to say, MGA cited the CFR to say that their products were not strong sensitizers, irritants, or toxic or corrosive when their product was recalled due to a number of people having reactions, both during an active recall and with the current product. They also say the frankly dubious claim that resin with 2-hydroxyethyl acrylate is not expected to cause irritation or sensitization when that is an extremely well-known risk with multiple decades of evidence backing it up. So sorry if I don't believe you that much, MGA, when you say the same thing that you said last time, exactly copy and paste it. I mean, on the box, I would argue, it does kind of admit that it's hazardous because it says avoid skin contact. It's just that you don't have an elaborate warning as to why to avoid skin contact, and what happens if you don't avoid skin contact. I should say, since I'm not trying to get myself sued, that I'm not accusing MGA of knowingly disregarding the FHSA regulations a second time. However, I personally think that they're a little obtuse about safety and include just enough vague disclaimers on the bottom of the box in tiny letters in order to not break the law. My assumption is that the phrase "as intended," as they say, somehow circumvents the fairly clear rules regarding resin, perhaps they can argue that, as intended, you are not supposed to spill the resins, which means that people won't accidentally spill it. They just never will have an accident and never touch the resin. I mean, it is true that you probably won't get the allergic reaction if you don't touch the resin, except for all of those people who breathed it in and got respiratory reactions. But we're just going to pretend they don't exist. So how are people doing with the whole not touching the resin thing?
Spilling the tea on resin. I'm sorry.
Obviously, people are spilling the resin. That's a given. It's a sticky, viscous substance, and the kit doesn't come with any gloves. It does say you're advised to use gloves, but it's clearly not that advised because all of the videos that MGA posts themselves of doing any of their kits don't show people wearing gloves. The videos that they use to promote both the Creative Crystals and Miniverse kits have hands without gloves. I watched 5 different adult toy reviewers use the Creative Crystals products, and not one of them used gloves, and only 2 of them even mentioned using gloves in passing or safety. I basically never see people use the Miniverse kits with gloves, even massive, millions of followers YouTubers. Don't wear gloves, hardly talk about safety, do not wear respirators or masks or anything. Not even those cheap masks that you can get at every single hospital. And yes, I hear the argument. A lot of these toy reviewers are adults who want to make toy content for adults. In fact, a lot of them include disclaimers saying, we want to make toy content for adults. But it's just disingenuous to pretend these videos aren't seen by and influencing kids, especially the ones that have millions of views and millions of followers. And I'm not saying an ounce about safety to their adult viewers, and showing poor practices is still bad. Because actually, news flash, I actually don't think it's okay not to inform adults about chemicals that could possibly harm them. Like, you're showing poor practices to children, and I think that is a level of harm that's a little bit worse because children have less life experience, but I actually think it's also bad to not tell adults about proper safety practices, as well as not even trying to, like, demonstrate them or give any, like, passing whisper to the concept of safety. And yes, people get this resin everywhere, because of course they do. I've read dozens of reviews of the Rainbow High Creative Crystals kits, and people say that it's sticky and that it gets everywhere. There are accounts of people saying their resin didn't cure properly, and a lot of people probably don't even know if their resin cured properly, because, like I said, resin being hard doesn't mean it's perfectly, completely cured, and that there's not liquid resin underneath. Speaking of which, Miniverse Part 2. Shortly after the recall of the original Miniverse kits last year, MJ began releasing new kits with a new formula. This formula is safer. When a customer submitted in February of this year, 2025, that the new formula had burned and blistered their finger, they responded with the exact same comment they had previously last year during the recall. It's the same copy-paste warning as before. So I'm sorry if I don't completely trust what they say, but I decided it would be interesting to look into what consumers said about Miniverse outside of Consumer Reports. For that, I turned to reddit.com, where a lot of people who love Miniverse come together on r/makeitmini and talk about Miniverse kits. So let's see how they're doing. Tim, can you be good for 5 seconds? Please don't be naughty. People continue to have reactions to the new formula, possibly because, as I said, even if they changed the methacrylate resin, many methacrylate allergies cross-react. The biggest thing I've heard is that the new Miniverse kits don't smell as strongly, which it seems to be the source of some misinformation online. People think that just because there aren't smells doesn't mean there aren't fumes, which isn't really always the case. Just because something doesn't smell strongly or smells good doesn't mean it's safe to inhale. This isn't 1542. Smells don't cause diseases. Your human nose cannot detect poison like a bloodhound. For the love of the pantheon of Greek gods, stop trying to smell resin, guys. You'd think that nobody had been to Organic Chem Lab. My god. Not only that, but a lot of these kits have the same problem that some of the old kits had, which is the resin has difficulty curing because of all the additives a lot of the time. UV resin needs UV light to penetrate fully, which means not too much opaque colorant, or embeds. You can see I mentioned earlier that I had the exact same issue with this, which is that the straw is opaque and the resin inside of the straw is not cured. Because it can't cure because it's inside an opaque straw. And I haven't been able to angle the light perfectly in the straw yet. But the sun certainly didn't angle perfectly inside the straw. I guess I'll try it with, like, the UV light. I don't know. If the resin is poured too thick, it might only penetrate a few layers and still have a hard surface. But the resin underneath is still liquid. This has happened so many times with miniverse, both old and new kits. Not only can the resin leak out if it's squished, but if you leave the model completely alone, it can cause the pieces to crack apart and leak uncured resin. Nowadays they are making some miniverse kits with different materials, such as a 2-part clay that is apparently used in some baking kits. I find this a little bit troubling because, like resin, epoxy-based clays should be mixed while wearing gloves. I don't know what the basis for this is, but as far as I can tell, they also don't explain on the packaging what exactly they're doing, and it doesn't seem to be air dry clay. They also have these kits that are labeled with gel and powder, and in the videos they remind me of making sculpted nail gels, which suggests that it could be another product that has some sort of methacrylate ingredient in it. It's not the same material as the resin before, but again, unknown. They don't explain what it is, and I don't necessarily think that's appropriate. I think it's become pretty clear throughout this video that I think that they should be more clear about labeling things, because a lot of similar chemicals can do you harm if you touch them. If you use epoxy clay, you are supposed to wear gloves. If you use nail gels, they have the same allergic reaction issues as other methacrylate resins. So I just find it inappropriate that they aren't further disclosing what these materials are doing. If it's non-toxic and completely fine for people to be using, then why aren't they just including labels explaining exactly what it is? Especially when they've used things in the past that they didn't disclose and people got injured from. And also, there's cases now of people being injured from the miniverse kits. Why? Like, we can expect that it's doing some chemical reaction. There should be a disclaimer as to if the ingredients are harmful to people. Isn't this like the basic thing? Oh my god. I know that a lot of people are going to call me fear-mongering and say I'm overreacting and blah 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 and be mad at me because they like the miniverse kits and they have fun with them and I'm just a hater, which I am a hater of companies being unsafe, okay? I don't like it when companies can potentially cause harm to people by not informing them about things that they should obviously be informed about. Reddit is full of people promoting unsafe handling practices, even when beginner crafters are asking for advice on how to stay safe while crafting. People love to say, well, you only need to use PPE if you're a delicate flower with glass skin and paper lungs, which frankly is some bull. Imagine going up to a guy at a construction site and saying, oh, you don't need that hard hat. Are you some fragile flower with delicate bones or something? Like, the point is to avoid an allergy that you could develop. You can't be sure you won't react to this weird man-made chemical because you're not allergic to wheat or something. And, like, also being allergic to things is not some sort of weakness. Like, it's not a value judgment. I don't know. A lot of people act like they're actually really strong for not being allergic to epoxy. It's like, it's a chemical that you can develop a sensitization and allergy to. It's up to you if you want to wear gloves, but you're not like a stronger person for deciding that you don't want to be safe. People just want to be the exception, and they don't want to give advice that suggests they're doing it the wrong way. They want to have a fun and relaxing craft time and not think about the toxic chemicals that they're using. Too bad. Go find some sidewalk chalk and play outside if you want non-toxic ingredients, because resin is not it. I don't care if someone chooses not to wear gloves, but giving other people advice and saying it's safe not to? Like, you can smoke cigarettes, but don't come to me and say that my grandma didn't die of lung cancer. There is good advice on Reddit sometimes, and other places when people discuss resin and resin safety, and good advice here on YouTube sometimes. There are some people who have been warning others about safety since before the recall of Miniverse and continue to talk about it after. There are people who have spoken openly about the rainbow high kits and how they're not appropriate for children. I have nothing against the concept of resin as a whole, or resin kits in theory, or people having fun. Obviously, look at all my toys, and also all my goddamn resin. I like fun. I make dolls all the time. This doll was printed on a 3D resin printer. I really like her. I like that resin is useful and can make so many creative things. Obviously, what I don't like is companies not disclosing the danger of the ingredients that they are selling to consumers.
Why did I make this? And why is it so long?
So why did I make this video? Miniverse is a successful brand with many adult and child fans. So is Rainbow High. Tons of people are learning about this new craft material and having fun. In theory, if it was fun. I wrote this section before I actually did the kits, and so I thought that they might be fun, but they weren't. Anyways, in my opinion, they're not being introduced to it in a safe way. They're not able to make a choice as to their own safety or the safety of their kids because the company making them is not providing adequate information as to the potential health effects of these chemicals or even the actual composition of the chemicals inside. With the exception of some of the Rainbow High kits, but not all of the ones on shelves. People, adults or kids, should not have to do additional research or read conflicting Reddit threads in order to know how to safely use a chemical that is available in the toy aisle. I started making this video partially out of shame and guilt. I bought a $5 craft kit from the store a few years ago when I knew nothing about resin. It was also labeled 8+, oddly enough. I did not use proper PPE because really I had no idea of the long-term effects of resin. After someone informed me more about it, I felt bad that I did not show proper usage of a potentially harmful chemical. And yes, I still feel that way, even though less than 300 people saw that video. Probably less than a third watched it through. I still felt bad for misinforming anyone who watched it on how potentially dangerous the chemical could be. A lot of people commented on my recent Barbie Gator video saying they were worried about me cutting myself with the X-Acto knife while hacking apart a Barbie into pieces. Which, fair enough. I wasn't really using best practice, and I said so in the video. You really shouldn't hold an X-Acto knife towards yourself, and so on. But also, the general public knows what a knife is. Anyone over 3 understands that holding a knife is dangerous. Resin is not a commonly used chemical, and not everyone understands the risks, both short-term contact dermatitis and the allergy. So, I don't feel bad about showing improper knife handling, but I do feel bad showing improper resin handling.
It's not just MGA. It's everyone else, too.
While I am discussing how MGA has handled and is handling their use of resin toys, it is worth mentioning that the problems with resin safety go far beyond that one company. Since resin has blown up in popularity, it's become much more widely available, and poor practices are showing up all over the place. Learning about resin safety really opened my eyes to how many crafting videos do not cure their resin properly. The YouTube channel Daniel Cooper has a great recent video about the unsafe practices he saw on a TikTok live. In short, people are making resin-coated phone cases that have large embedded objects and thick glitter over opaque phone cases. As he points out, these are certainly not curing properly. There is going to be a layer of uncured resin which could leak out in every phone case that has an opaque thing on top of UV resin. Essentially UV resin sandwiched between 2 opaque layers. The reason I noted that MGA likes to call their resin glue is because of people doing things like this, because they don't know how resin works. Resin can attach or help secure two very small objects or transparent objects together, but it can't be used to glue opaque items together because the UV light won't reach the inner layers. That's what's going on with the miniverse kits, where you can fill a bowl full of pasta and the cheese sauce never cures if the light can't go through the noodles. Generally, people seem to be mistaking the fact that UV resin is hard for the idea that it's a good adhesive. There are UV glues sold specifically for that, but not everything is a UV glue just because it's UV resin. And most UV resin I've seen is very rigid, but brittle, so it actually snaps very easily. It's like how people keep using nail polish instead of acrylic gloss varnish. It looks like it does the same thing as normal gloss varnish, but nail polish is not made of the same stuff as varnish and won't perform the same over time. But also, like, UV resin isn't even easier to get than normal glue. Like, I don't understand why people aren't just buying, like, super glue or all-purpose glue or contact cement, because UV resin is so expensive, and like I said, it's not typically the adhesive kind that people are using. They're just using UV resin because it, I don't know, cures fast in exchange for not actually being glue? I don't know. All that is to say, there are a lot of people mishandling or unaware of the risks of UV resin all over the place. These people are not MGA because MGA is not a people. It is a multi-billion-dollar company producing products. But as producers of what is hands down the most accessible line of resin-based products, I personally think that they have a responsibility to do better.
Stop giving resin to children. An unpopular opinion, apparently.
I can't believe I have to say this, but I do not care how mature an 8-year-old is. It should be obvious that we should limit their exposure to volatile chemicals. You know, like we as in a society of people. This My Little Pony could not be produced today. Neither could this one. That's because in 2008, during my childhood, phthalates were heavily restricted or banned in children's toys. Phthalates are plasticizers, which are used in PVC items to make them squishy. Phthalates are and were in a ton of other things like lotions, food containers, medical devices, and so on. Evidence was found that some phthalates are endocrine disruptors, meaning that they mess with the hormones inside of your body. For example, infants with higher levels of phthalates in their blood are found to have lower birth weights on average. Hey, wait a second, that actually has nothing to do with toys, because newly born infants are obviously not playing with toys. Their blood exposure is generally through their mothers eating food or using lotions with phthalates. But still, phthalates are now heavily regulated in children's toys. Because even though we understood that toys aren't always the root of exposure, we know enough about the chemicals to know that they have the potential to cause harm to people, and especially cause harm to kids specifically, because they're at a delicate life stage. They're much smaller than adults, so chemicals can affect them differently. So we set regulations to limit their exposure and routes of entry for phthalates to get into them. Phthalates are useful in medical devices, so we can't take them out of those. We know that we don't need them in children's toys, so we removed them, and now we have to make My Little Ponies that aren't squishy, which makes me very sad. But, you know, it is what it is. It's not the end of the world. So it's just that, knowing how cautious regulations are around the world on other chemicals, it really baffles me that they would allow resin into a children's toy at all, even if there are some warnings on it. Like, you can't just produce a My Little Pony with phthalates and put a warning on it that says, this is only a little bit, or like, put a warning on it that's like, maybe this My Little Pony is an endocrine disruptor, we don't know. I will repeat, for disclaimer's sake, that I am not saying that MGA is breaking any laws. In my opinion, they are circumventing the spirit of existing laws made to protect children as well as adults. But I also don't really care about the law. Even if the law said it was completely fine to put resin into children's toys and not write any warnings at all, even if that was explicitly written in the FHSA, and they said you can do whatever you want, I wouldn't think that this was okay. Yes, I talked about the law a lot in this video, because there was a recall already, and I wanted to see why the law that applied to the miniverse kits last year doesn't apply to the Rainbow High kits, especially if the 2-hydroxyethyl acrylate appears to have similar toxic properties to the 2-hydroxyethyl methacrylate, based on my research. But even if there hadn't been a recall already, that wouldn't make everything okay. Like, obviously. A lot of people simply place blame on parents because they should, quote, know better, unquote. But basically every toy on the shelves nowadays has warnings that say things like 3+, including this packaging which says 8+ and 3+, even though 8+ includes 3+, obviously. Parents are basically conditioned to ignore these warnings because they're everywhere. I mean, basically every food you find at the store is telling you that it complies with California's cancer warning in the United States, because California has slightly stricter regulations than everywhere else and needs more specific warnings. So a lot of things are labeled specifically for them. Even the way this box is laid out is confusing because of the 8+ and warning choking hazard, small parts not for our children under 3 years. I mean, is it a choking hazard to 8-year-olds or 3-year-olds? I can see someone being confused, but also, why would they expect that there would be a hazardous chemical at all in the children's aisle? Like, I would assume that the children's toy aisle is the place where there aren't any hazardous chemicals, where you don't have to be on guard against hazardous chemicals. Because there are regulations, in theory, that prevent those from being included in children's toys. And you would think that if they had chemicals that could cause skin irritation, they would be labeled, like, more clearly than they are. I'm not trying to say that kids as a whole are, like, stupid or incapable. I've known and worked with many kids. I have 3 younger siblings, and I have multiple baby cousins. There are kids I know who could absolutely have been trusted to work with resin at 8 years old, and also those who I would absolutely not. But given potential health effects of resin that we know, and the fact that this area is basically understudied in kids specifically, I don't see why we would accept that level of risk, or any parent would accept that level of risk. And kids who are around 8 might have younger siblings around, or friends who are younger or less mature than them. There are a lot of safe craft supplies that younger kids could use instead of handling resin. In conclusion, the script for this video is over 10,000 words long. The thing that really upsets me is thinking about how difficult it would be to tell whether or not something like this had caused an allergy to a user until well after the fact. Not everyone gets a rash right away, not everyone gets an allergy right away. People can be sensitized after repeated usage. People who use this one time might be fine, but what about kids who grow up using these resin toys all the time? Kids especially are prone to getting into all sorts of weird things. Touching weird things, getting weird injuries. My young cousin, who is now 10, has several allergies and gets blisters when she touches dog drool. She has allergies to peanuts and tree nuts. Who knows if she would react to resin in toys, but also, how would we know the source was that toy instead of the neighbor's dog or cookie crumbs that had peanut butter in them or something? If a kid, or anyone, goes to get dental fillers and gets lesions in their mouth, how likely is it that they're going to connect that to resin exposure from craft kits? Especially when these companies are not clear about what the chemicals inside their products are or the risks associated with them are. The box says don't touch, but doesn't explain why, doesn't explain the risks. Why would you say not to touch them? If they are not toxic, if they are not sensitizers, why do you admit that you shouldn't touch them? If you break your leg and you need bone cement, if you use sanitary pads, if you want acrylic nails, all of those use chemicals that cross-react with common ingredients in resin, including the one used formerly in the miniverse kits and the 2-hydroxyethyl acrylate, which is in the current Rainbow High kit, at least some of them. I don't know what is in these modern miniverse kits, either the resin ones or the gel powder clay ones, but that also means I don't know if they're safe either. People who use safety precautions might even be at risk if these products don't cure properly and they leak after the fact. If MGA was being more responsible, they would make clear warning labels on their packaging, both the outside prior to customers purchasing it clearly, and on the inside where the resin bottles actually are. They should elaborate on exactly what the risks are if you do get it on your skin and why, and the long-term risks. Make a pink fucking flowery respirator or include child-sized gloves or something and sell that on the side. How about that, MGA? It's my business idea. And also wear gloves in your promotional videos. I don't think it's entirely impossible to make a kit similar to this responsibly, but with clear labeling of the ingredients. But at the same time, I think that if you're using a chemical that's as hazardous as resin, it should be because it's the best ingredient for the purpose and there are no other good alternatives. But I just don't really believe that's true here. Tons of talented miniverse creators have shown that there are lots of alternatives to using resin. There's puffy paint or Mod Podge for the thinner layers of things and sort of fake liquids. These take time to dry, but I would point out that a huge problem with miniverse is them not curing or taking a really long time to cure, so why not just move to something that air dries? I mean, my paint palette and all of my air dry clay managed to try and dry whenever I'm not looking, so I don't see why you could not just use air dry, non-toxic paint and clay with some sort of maybe thickener to speed up the drying process. Or just let it air dry. People have used museum gel and clear slime for making non-permanent, like, filled cups, like with the fake liquids that resin is often used to simulate, which is very good for play because they can obviously be removed to simulate dolls drinking them or whatever. They could use things like plaster, which is a powder mixed with water to simulate a cake. I mean, maybe that's what the containers labeled gel and powder have in them, but I assume that is more similar to nail gels and powders. In terms of other art supplies, there's hot glue, which is a more permanent solution, but it already comes in different colors and it's already normally transparent. They wouldn't even have to sell their own hot glue gun because hot glue guns have like standard sizes and you could probably just sell glue sticks in those sizes. There's also, like, in the resin section, I've seen these silicone beads that melt in hot water and they really just become malleable and stick together, and they can be used to make molds. But you could use that kind of thing to make a clear fake liquid or an opaque liquid or a semi-solid thing you could shape yourself before it hardens or put in a mold or something. And then also it could be heated up after the fact to make it reusable. My understanding is it only needs to be heated with like very hot water. And like, even though heating is a potential danger, it's sort of a more understandable danger than the hazards associated with resin. There are other professional art supplies that I wouldn't necessarily give to kids, but would fit with this type of gimmick. Liquid Super Sculpey is a polymer liquid that hardens when it bakes in the oven and can be transparent. Polymer clay does give off some fumes when baking, so I would personally avoid it when using them with kids, but I also can't throw stones since I used those when I was like 8 also. Of course, you would have to make sure that the plastic would be oven safe, but polymer clays tend to cure around 275 in my experience, and a lot of plastics and silicones are safe to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. So I think that's doable potentially. 2-part silicones also generally seem to be safer than 2-part resin epoxies and UV resin from what I can tell, but that's a bit trickier since you'd have to mix things. The YouTuber Macaroon has reviewed some children's kits. They seem to use 2-part silicone or something similar, although she does point out when they don't disclose the ingredients, which is frequent. I've always used gloves and stuff with silicone just in case, but on my 2-part silicone that is from Smooth On, who have the safety data sheets for their 2-part resins and silicones online, the silicone is not a hazard per both the safety data sheet and the bottle. It seems to be because liquid silicone is a type of polymer called an elastomer, elastic polymer, as you can imagine. And remember from earlier, polymers are larger and less likely to get into your skin and generally more stable than monomers, like what resin's typically made of. A polymer is what resin turns into after curing. Using UV resin is a gimmick. UV color changing dolls have been a thing since the 1980s, and this is no different. They want instant gratification, even though their product doesn't even always work, and there are all of these issues with being potentially hazardous to consumers. They want it to seem magical and unique in a way, and they are kind of unique because they seem to be the only people on the market doing this. But that doesn't mean that it's a good thing. I would feel better about it if they were actually teaching consumers, but they're not. They say to think of UV resin like glue. They don't include clear labeling, and they're selling a product that other companies are labeling like 15 plus to 8-year-old children. If you want to put hazardous chemicals in kids' toys, then you can use it as an opportunity to do some science-related education, make these dolls or miniverse kits science-themed, teach kids about the chemicals that they're using and how to stay safe. Honestly, there's even like exemptions for science-themed kits when selling children's toys. It's in the Code of Federal Regulations guidelines. But instead they decided to use this decidedly not food chemical to make tiny food and purses because we need more tiny plastic purses for little girls. Like, God forbid one of your dolls be science-related in any way. I mean, you can make her a mad scientist using hazardous chemicals to make fashionable clothing, but my God, can you be more creative than just, this product is clear, so let's call it a crystal? Sorry, you might think I'm being pedantic, but as a child I would have also been bothered by this. It's not even really a creative activity, like you're just putting pre-made liquid into a mold. You only have one color, you can't choose other things. This is the job that the machine does at the factory in order to create the doll. You are the 3D printer. You're not a creative or a designer. You're just following instructions. If you hate children and their parents so much, you might as well give them some glitter so they can customize their dolls and everything they own with it. Like, at least that would be a little bit fun. Anyways, in summation, I didn't like this doll activity very much, and I also don't really like the company that makes it because I feel like they provide inadequate warning for the potential harm that their products could produce. Just in my opinion. Personally. I'm not accusing them of doing anything illegal or breaking the law. I just wanted to make this video to tell you about how I really feel about how they're selling resin in the children's aisle at Target to 8-year-olds. Also, after playing with the accessories and making them, I thought they weren't very fun. And in fact were inadequate products in and of themselves, as well as being potentially hazardous, in my opinion. Anyways, if you've made it to this part of the video, thanks for watching. If you comment below without watching the whole thing, making points I've already covered, the demons will come for you in the night. If you liked this video and want to see more, please go subscribe somewhere else. I usually make doll videos, and I have no interest in becoming a channel that covers the poor decisions that billion-dollar toy companies make. Farewell. Say bye-bye, Skylar. Bye-bye. on me. Oh. Guys, I got it on me. That's not good. This is made of something bad. I need to go and wash my hands now. I've only just started this video and I already got a toxic chemical on me. Let's count the number of times. Clearly I need gloves